Yeah, I'll put it up here.
So we have 0 viewers right now. Yes.
I'm Glenn Hutchins.
Hey, Glenn. Nice to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you as well.
Oh, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I know you're about to get started. So
Yeah.
Just introduce myself before
Thank you.
we get
Yeah.
rolling.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you inviting me.
No problem. Yeah. You're more than welcome.
So I learned something.
Yeah. And we still need to talk about whatever you have going on right now. So
No worries.
we'll discuss that after.
We'll figure it out. So, all right, man.
Nice to meet you, Glenn. So this is the Google Hangouts on air on January 20, 2015 for the Austin Mean Stack user group. And today is Andy Thornton's presentation on D3JS. And this is just for the sake of the recording. I don't see any viewers on here right now, but we'll get started here in a minute. And everybody's just grabbing meets right now. Let me just show the Mean Stack users here real quick. Everybody say hello. Hi, Mom. There's the Grazers over there, grabbing some pizza. So I'm gonna let this run, and then we'll see if we get any viewers. But either way, we're gonna record this. So, and this is Andy. Get started here in a minute. I did. I sent you an invitation.
Or you just go to it.
I don't want to do a refresh just in case. It says 0 viewers on there.
Yeah,
Can you see it?
the viewers in this really like chop. They got kind of repeated.
There you go, 1 viewer. Two viewers. We're getting folks popping up, so. We have door prizes from New Iron, and if you want to participate, grab two from here, put the picture over here, so that way you get a chance to win. Just come right over here and grab the card that says keep this coupon, and then take it one, put it in the front. And then we'll select winners for about 8.5-ish round slots. So must be present to win, and 1 ticket per customer.
I don't see on here how to share like any slides or anything.
So I think I might have to give you the presenter role here. Let's see.
Tell me anything from me.
I'm good. Thank you. So I can share my screen,
I
but
don't have any options like request control.
if Todd, let me see if either of it does. Familiar with Google Hangouts? Nobody? I'm trying to give Andy control as presenter, so that way he can share his slides. Yeah. Otherwise, there's nothing leaving on the screen. Well, it's close to 7:20 already, so I think we need to get started. So we'll just, I guess I'll just have to see it from the screen there. Is it? Oh my gosh. How they go up in the DC area, these we'll give it a shot. First wheel. You've already up. Before I get started, it's half an hour after we're supposed to start, so everybody welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Monica Moreno. I'm the founder and the organizer, the co-organizer of the Austin, the Austin Meetup Feature Group, but also the Meetup as well. So tonight, I had notes somewhere. So food and drinks, just logistics real quick. Food and drinks are back there. We have pizza, Cokes, and there's some ice back there too. So trash can, everybody please clean up after yourselves. We have the bathrooms right back there. In case any of you are interested, this is the Iron Yard, which is right over there. This is kind of a foyer space because we have a lot of people accept the invitations. So here, which is good thing. So we are trying to do this on Google Hangouts on air, which is recording off my MacBook over there. There's a couple of glitches and kinks here and there that we need to work out, but it is going, so it is recording, and I think it's like a couple of minutes behind. So if you're logged onto that, we're going to be a little lag behind, but that's okay. We'll get it on there so somebody else can view it later on. I was going to mention next meetup we have something planned, but I don't want to mention anything about yet. So, but keep an eye out on that on the meetup page, and you'll see what we have planned for next month. Pretty exciting stuff. So, what's that? Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. That's Amir over there. He's the one that's going to hopefully do it for us. So you've already done one for us, haven't you? Back in August last year. So, so before we get started with the actual presentation, I always try to thank the sponsors that helped out with a lot of this, because doing all of this costs money and a lot of effort. So I always make sure that I thank everybody for that. First and foremost, of course, the beginning here is the Iron Yard, and the Iron Yard is actually nationwide, I think, but they're new to Austin, and Kate Booth is director here. So I'm going to pass it on to her so she can say a few words.
Okay, I won't talk long.
Yes.
Right here. We are a 3-month course IRS. We have a JavaScript track, we have a Ruby on Rails track, and we have a website track. So I'm going to leave my heart right here. If anybody's interested, ask questions for me. I'll be coming down there with my kids during the meeting, so you can also come in there and talk to me. Yeah, feel free if you want to check out the space. Also, on there. But yeah, thank you.
Iron Yard also they provide the food and drinks for us tonight. So thank you. New Iron, which has been one of our sponsors since the very beginning last year, back in June or July, I think, is also one of our sponsors tonight. They're providing Apple gift cards as door prizes. So there are 4 cards, $25 each. I'm going to go ahead and hand them out as door prizes, 2 per door prize. So there's going to be 2 drawings. Each winner is going to get $50 worth of Apple Store gift cards. So Will Longnecker, who's way back there, remember? Sure. He is a good guy that's been with me since the very beginning.
Yeah,
so,
I remember we went to Chipotle to talk about all this. Right. So thank you. And Monica's done an amazing job with this. The turnout tonight is awesome, and it's getting better every time. So a little about New Iron. So we're an Austin-founded company back in 2000 as a custom software dev shop, focusing mainly in the Java space. We became very good at that in consulting, and over the years that grew into recruiting as well for our clients that might have a footprint here in Austin, but didn't have the logistics on site to recruit. So fast forward to today, we do about 40% Java, Grails development in-house with our team here in Austin, but we do about 60% recruiting for our clients. Sometimes that's working on specific projects for them, other times it's working on projects that we're doing to help close it out or finish it up. So whether you're interested in working possibly directly with us, or you're looking for an opportunity to get into a bigger company here in Austin, let me know. I'll leave some cards. Happy to help. One thing I would ask real quick is, I can leave my cards and y'all can reach me that way if you want, or when we have an active opportunity I think is a good fit for this market, I can post it on the site and let y'all check out the job description. Would you prefer that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do that. Go ahead.
Just one question. On the recruiting side, you only need to help place people with more experience or more entry level?
It really depends. We've done primarily a focus on engineers and architects, the high level programmers. However, oftentimes if we're tasked to build a team, a portion of that team is of course going to be entry level people. If you're here at the Iron Yard, you make a good step into a new career to advance your current career. I actually used to speak every cohort at Maker Square, which was a similar model. I don't know, I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but I've heard wonderful things about the Iron Yard. So I'm always happy to talk to entry-level new programmers about the world that's out there that is trying to get a job in this industry. And you can grab a card and email me as well on that. So thanks a bunch. Sorry, man.
Thank you. So, one quick mention, Bob Emmett from Providence Partners asked me to mention the position. I posted it on the Meetup page, so if anybody's interested, take a look. I think it's 2 of the letters in the acronym for MEAN, so it is Meanish. So if you guys are interested, please take a look on the website and get ahead of that. So, last but not least, Mr. Andy Thornton is going to be represented for tonight. I met Andy last year in October. He gave a presentation at the Meetup, and it was a great presentation. Talked to him afterwards, and he mentioned to me that he does some lean stack development, so he's an awesome meeting. Hey. So I was happy to hear that, and I asked him, and he gladly accepted the invitation to come and speak with us. So without further delay, Mr. Andy Thornton.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me all the way in the back? Good? All right. So as Monica mentioned, my name is Andrew Thornton. I'm a front-end dev here in Austin. And I'm going to speak to you today about mainly, I guess, the A of the mean stack, the Angular part, in particular, how D3, a data visualization library, can integrate with Angular. Again, thanks to the Iron Yard for sponsoring. Looks like probably about half the attendants showed up, which is good considering traffic. A little background about me. I actually have 3 years of D3 experience. I also have 3 years of JavaScript experience. So I actually learned to program front-end dev work to learn D3. But prior to that, I was a controls engineer in automation doing PLC and robotic programming, kind of morphed into now front-end dev doing data visualization. So long story behind all that. I think I can tell you some other time. But in part of learning D3, I was very active in the D3 Guild group, which got me some exposure to some publishers who wanted me to help co-author a book on D3, which is right there, developing a D3 edge about reusable D3 components. Kind of goes one level above just static charts in D3 and actually using stuff that more app level developers would use in a company as opposed to, say, a data generalist doing a one-off chart for, say, a publication. Moved to Austin about 2.5 years ago, and when I arrived, I quickly realized that there's actually wasn't a very large D3 presence here. So I decided to start the Austin D3 Meetup. So if any of you are really interested in the D3 part and want to dive deeper into some of the things that I'll talk about here, definitely check it out. We'd love to have you in the group. We meet somewhat infrequently. It's usually corresponds with my availability, time, and sponsorship. Also, if anybody has a company that likes to sponsor events, please let me know. Certainly be happy to use and abuse the space and bring some pretty good devs in. Currently, I'm the front-end dev. The other guy does all the back-end and some front-end. He does mainly Python on the back-end. But I do all the front-end, or a large chunk of the front-end work, working with Angular day-to-day and D3 day-to-day. Our app is very heavy on data visualization, so that's kind of why they brought me into that role. Like I said, I learned D3 first, and I picked up Angular along the way. Then you can check out my Twitter handle and then some of my work, just to show you that I can actually do some of this. This is on my site. And by the way, if you go to encodingpixels.com, you can actually, the slides are there. They're listed on the front page, and you can kind of follow along if you want. But this is a visualization I did recently on Austin bike theft data. There was a story on KXAN News about these bait bikes that they were placing, and I thought, oh, it'd be kind of cool to see if we had data to show where they should put these bikes. So this is an interactive visualization I did just in my spare time. And it's interactive via cross-filter, so it's doing the data aggregation all on the browser. So really the only data loading is when the data comes in initially, and then I'm aggregating and filtering using a library called cross-filter. So it does some hex binning here on the map, and the map is zoomable. The map is custom. I just made some from readily available Austin shapefiles using topo.json, which are all cross-filter, topo.json. These are all companion libraries of D3 and things I would tend to talk about in the D3 meetup. So if this stuff is really cool to you, please check us out. So this is the latest one I did. I don't know someone wants me to work. I have the most time to work on these things, but you can check out some more of my work on my site if you so desire. And I always do a little bit of announcements on D3. Real quick, before I get into too much of that, does anybody here have experience with D3? A couple? Roughly? Is it pretty low? That's cool. That's typically what I get is people kind of, played around with a little bit, copy pasted some examples. And, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, for those of you who are interested, D3 version 3 just came out, which has name transitions. So I can show you what that means here in a second. There's some cool talks out there by Mike Bostock, the guy who created D3. I/O conference is a data visualization conference. That video is online. And also another one, I've linked there in the presentation, Jason Davies. He's the guy behind the geographic projections you can see in D3. So if you see all the cool mapping, the map that I showed you of the Austin bike data, all that was created using geo projections, which the guy is pretty brilliant out of the UK, Jason Davies. He does a really cool talk. So if you're into that kind of stuff. A couple cool things with D3. This one is actually from a guy in our group combining D3 and 3.js. So he's doing 3D along with data binding. So you can see you can rescale these. His name is Bill White. He's a member of our D3 group. So I thought he actually just pushed this up yesterday. I think that was kind of cool. There is some cool animated art some guy just did this week, all done in D3. So I just want to show you some cool, maybe off the wall things that are popular. So this is all done in D3. He's got a bunch of them on here. He's doing one a day, so I'm gonna check that out. That was pretty cool. Some of them are pretty trippy. This one was kind of interesting. Mike Bostock put together a piano. See if I can do this without too much feedback. It sounds terrible, but it's kind of cool. It's all in so some weird things you can do with D3. This one was really interesting. Mike Bostock, the creator of D3, did actually tells you where the sun is right now. Using the geolocation from your browser, all D3. And this is, again, the geo projections. It's one of the crazier projections. It's not part of the standard. It's available via plugin. But let's see. I guess we don't have the sun. I should look outside. So, the sun is not out there. So anyway, this is pretty. I thought that was pretty cool. And then big one, Mike Bostock, the creator, actually works for the New York Times. So if you see visualizations on the New York Times, mapping every path of the NFL playoffs was this interactive. They did. Not much going on now because we kind of know what's going on with the NFL playoffs, I guess. But I'm not a big football fan, but this got a lot of. This got a pretty big response when they did it. They've also done one for the election. So a lot of times if you see visualizations on the New York Times, their visualization department is pretty epic. It's going to be Mike Bostock, the guy behind D3, and that team developing them in D3. So that was kind of one of the later, that's kind of new this week, I should say. A real quick history about D3. It was created by, like I said, Mike Bostock in about 2011. It's about the earliest date that I can find. Looking at Git logs and some articles. And in particular, this paper at the bottom from the IEEE conference, that's where they really got, that's where it was born out of. So if you're really into this and you want to know where it was born, check out that paper. It was born out of another library called ProtoViz, which was a little different and it's actually a kind of a level above D3, and then it abstracted you away from the DOM. So, some goods about D3, or the good, I would say, amongst many others. One thing is that it embraces web standards, like I mentioned in ProtoViz, which would actually abstract you away from web standards, away from the DOM. D3 kind of, they tried that approach. I think they found that it doesn't scale well because browsers were changing very quickly. So therefore, embrace the standard and build a library with that in mind. And that's what they've done. So what that means is that it's, they don't abstract you away from the DOM. You can work with HTML, you're working with JavaScript, you're working with CSS. And because it uses web standards, it's very easy to debug. Chrome debugger, it's all there. You know, it's not proprietary library or anything, or something that's really hard to get around. You can use Chrome debugger, my favorite, or any debugger, and get access to these, DOM elements, all the code, put in code breaks, debuggers, everything. D3 has some amazingly powerful layouts, which I'll show you a little bit, from trees to forest layouts to the geo projection layouts. And you'll see that the code to do a lot of these crazy things is very terse. It's very short, and it kind of, it really can be a little intimidating when you first look at it. Like, how did they get all that information just in 60 lines of code? But it's because the layouts are very powerful. I would argue to say it's fairly widely used in some fashion, either directly or often indirectly via a library, an abstraction library built on D3, like dc.js. NVD3, amongst many others. The list seems to grow weekly, I feel like. I wish they just kind of come together and maybe consolidate a little bit, but there's plenty of options if you're into options. There's a lot of examples. The great part about D3 is that there's a lot to learn from. Someone's probably developed a chart or in some shape or form that you want to develop, and they're very happy to post the examples. And of course, my favorite is it's just really cool. With D3, we do really lame things like histograms, the stuff you have to do at work most of the time, stacked bar charts, sortable bar charts. You see this one, we can sort just the alphabet, pretty straightforward. But we can sort, do cool transitions. Line charts, your basic scatter plots. This one's cool, a zoomable icicle. So all these are, portions of the data subdivided that we can zoom in and out of. So some things like this. You can see here, this is the main layout function I was talking about, those layouts. And this is all the code right here that's used to make all that. So very, very terse, but very powerful. You can do maps, choropleth maps here. This is unemployment data amongst the US. Cool satellite projections, which I've yet to find a use for, but I try really hard to. I just never found a good use for it. Actually, on that one, I made there's an API of the current location of the space station, and I put it up there and like kept refreshing via WebSockets, but it didn't work out too well, but it looked cool. So there is a use for it, I guess. Cool collapsible force diagrams that everyone loves to play with. Very springy. This one can collapse and then go away to nothing. So these can be like this, fun, and they can be sticky. They can do all kinds of crazy stuff. There's a lot of examples out there. People love force diagrams. This one is cool. You can see force diagrams have gravity. All force diagrams have gravity and charge, so you can see they repel, they fly off the screen, then they gravitate towards a focal point based on their color, and they eventually fade away. So that's possible in D3. This really cool one, which is a maze that I don't understand. It's Wilson's algorithm, apparently, spanning algorithm that shows that a maze is essentially a tree. So I always like to watch this one. So it's random every time, and it just morphs from a maze to a tree. So if someone ever wants to tell you that a maze isn't a tree, at least this one, then you can send this to them. So these are all by Mike Bostock that I've showed you thus far. This is, like I said, the guy is he's kind of a beast when it comes to this stuff. So all the code is readily available on this thing called Blocks. It's Code Explorer. If you go to GitHub, the main page for GitHub or for D3 on GitHub, there's a link to here where you can see everyone's examples that are hosted. So plenty to learn from. This it shows a live algorithm of adaptive resampling for geoprojections. It's basically how they get rid of artifacts in geoprojections. You can see if they didn't resample how the geoprojection would actually look when it's flattened out. And it's very difficult to flatten a globe, a sphere, to visualize. So this is actually how they, how they resample. They're using D3 to show you how D3 works. Yeah. Yeah. So this is apparently this guy's algorithm. So I'm certainly not the best on these. I just know how to use D3, but I think it's pretty cool to show people. There's a whole long explanation that actually goes into that. It's linked to it if you want to see their whole thought process. It was part of a conference they did. And then, of course, this one. So these are Voronoi diagrams. Basically, it's like a mailbox. I've heard it described as the post office problem, finding the best way to subdivide all this space nearest focal point. So there's all a point at the center of these shapes. Basically, it's trying to subdivide all this space as efficiently as possible. So it's kind of fun to play around. So I would say I put the bad because I guess I'm a little bit partial to D3, but these are the harder parts, I would say. It has this very steep learning curve, at least. My viewpoint is a little jaded. I actually learned to program learning D3, so that's all I know. And I guess that's kind of like, that's how you learn to program. But it can be a little intimidating for people who especially aren't familiar with JavaScript learning D3. But in general, the syntax, looking through the source code, I think they make every effort to save a white space and a character where they can, and do it a little bit differently than perhaps most people are used to seeing. So looking at the source code can be kind of intimidating sometimes. But the main reason I say this steep learning curve is what's known as a data join. It's basically the most integral part of D3. It's how we join JSON arrays and JSON blobs and all your data to DOM elements. And it's responsible for putting elements on the screen, updating elements that are already there, and taking off the elements that no longer need to be there. Undoubtedly the most misunderstood part of D3 definitely the issue that I see most brought up in the Google groups when we answer questions. The most abused and, kind of just mangled part, because it's really simple once you get it, but it's one of those things that just has to kind of snap, for everybody organically. It's kind of a hard thing just to accept. Once you really understand it, you'll really understand the power of D3. So that's far too technical for this talk, but I put some links here, some great articles. If you're really serious about learning D3, then I highly suggest starting with those 3 first, just so you can develop some good habits first.
So quick question, on the first bullet point, you mentioned steep learning curve. Would you say that it's the inverse of Angular? I've heard Angular is more, you can learn it right away, but then to master it is the difficulty?
Yeah, I guess, and I was going to mention that here too. I kind of say that Angular has a steep learning curve because I guess to me doing like a to-do app is somewhat trivial.
Right.
That's really easy, right? But then once you go anywhere past that, I feel like Angular really skyrockets. I think D3 is hard from the beginning. I think,
And then it gets
at least
easier.
in my experience, perhaps not for everyone, but I've seen a lot of friends that come into it and they look at the source, they copy and paste and it works great, which is a good thing about D3 sometimes, but then they just don't understand the underworkings.
Right.
When something goes wrong or they need to adapt it slightly, I feel like the wheels
Get in
tend to
trouble.
fall off.
Yeah.
And it's really because of that data join. I think people it's very easy part of the code to copy and paste and take for granted that it works. And you can work around it
Right.
and never really touch it until you touch it, and then it just kind of
Falls apart. It's like a house of cards.
It's the most fragile part, I would say. So, but definitely check out those 3 resources if you're interested in learning D3. So now I'm talking to an Angular group. I normally talk to, I guess, a D3 group. So this is what I would say the good, and I'll talk about some of what I think is the bad. So feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm somewhat new to Angular. I'd say about 2 years worth of Angular experience. I use it on a daily basis. I still get bit by it every once in a while, but I'm mainly D3. But I've learned Angular, and I've really learned to like Angular. So. One thing I like is that some people hate is that I like the fact that Angular embraces HTML. I'm just kind of used to working with it. I found a lot of power in that, especially when Angular came out with the ng model options directive where you can do getter setters. I'm very comfortable with the getter setter paradigm, I suppose. And that kind of opened up a whole new world in our app, actually. So, and I like that. It's kind of easy to get carried away with putting a bunch of Angular and logic in HTML for sure, but I definitely see some benefits to it. The reusable widgets, in particular, how this applies to D3 via the directives. D3 code should almost always live in a directive. I've yet to see a case where I haven't found that to be true. That's the reusable piece of HTML that you want to pass around. That should be very, I guess, separated from business logic and trying to keep, a lot of heavy business logic out of the directives, obviously, and then that's where we can put D3 to accept new data in a directive and basically reuse this through the app. I really like the testability of Angular. I've had great luck doing the unit tests. I don't do that, our end-to-end work. We have another guy that does that. And if he's not, end-to-end's never fun, I don't think, but if he's having a really hard time, he's not telling anybody about it, so he must be doing okay. So testability I find to be pretty good. The dependency injection, certainly, is a big one for I think, a lot of people. And as you mentioned, Marco, the simple apps I think are simple. If you need a simple kind of one-page app, the to-do app example, is very, I think that's what got me initially. The first time I tried Backbone, I was like, I feel stupid. Should this be this hard? And I'm sure it's not, but the initial learning curve was just too much for my ADD mind, so I just quit and I went to something else. So I found Angular. And like I said, simple apps are simple, and I think the fact that it's backed by Google hopefully has some staying power to it. I guess we'll see. I don't know, 2.0 coming down the pipe. I'm not sure what to think of that yet. Some of the bad, I would say, or however you want to see it, maybe subjective, is that for some people it embraces HTML. Like I said, this could be a bad because there could be a lot of people can get carried away putting business logic baked into HTML code because it can get unwieldy fast. And they're like, so where do you modify this data or something, or probably a bad example, but then you can tell somebody in the HTML they're going to be ready to get out. So one thing I don't really appreciate, or I don't care too much for, but we've been able to adapt to it pretty well. And if anybody has a better idea than me, but I don't think there's a real solid model concept. There's services, there's filters, there's our controllers for directives, but as far as a model, there's really not much there in Angular, which could be good because you can come up with your own. We have just vanilla JavaScript models that we use for our app, but for some people this can be a bad. I think Backbone has a little more established model framework. I think so. I see some head shaking this. Scope.watch, another issue I've had is it can be problematic, particularly in D3. If you're watching for a data change and you're updating that data with D3 drag event, which fires every, say, 50 milliseconds, you're hitting your scope digest cycle every time, and you can bring your app to a crawl. So I know because I've done it. Everything was working fine, and we added a drag on a circle, like a control point. And as soon as we did that, the entire app just, got the all snap screen. So, so that can be an issue. And it's particularly with D3 and really any library, anything outside of Angular, is if you want to update, if you have an event that you need to update Angular, the data binding, you have to manually fire scope digest. Because it happens outside of Angular, Angular doesn't know about it. We need to tell Angular, hey, you need to digest this new data so that you can update the DOM. So that can be troublesome for some just because where do we do that? And also, you can forget to do that. And so there's some issues that come along with that, and I'll get into that here. So why Angular and D3? And on my eyes, Angular shouldn't do data viz. I've got a footnote in there that it's possible. You can check out that link. Some guy actually says, theorizes that you could potentially change or get rid of D3 using Angular. And there's a lot of things you could do. You can do ng repeats on elements and update their data attributes. But Angular doesn't always play too well with SVG. I've run into issues. And Angular doesn't have some of the layouts that we need, the tree layouts, the force. And I know some guys have done it, and it just seems like it would be kind of a waste of my time at that point. I think it was certainly quite hacky, but I guess I just want to show the potential. But in my mind, Angular shouldn't do data viz. And on the contrary, D3 shouldn't do application logic. So that we can bring those two together whenever we have an app that we want to do. We want data visualization in some sort of larger ecosystem, some sort of larger web app, some sort of enterprise app that is, has a data visual component, but isn't an app in and of itself. It's not a static visualization in the New York Times. Right? I don't think, is there any data journalists in here? Yeah, there never are. So most of us are web app developers who may have to do a visualization component. So again, these frameworks exist for a reason. We have the separation of business logic with Angular and the visualization logic with D3. And one thing I always say is don't make D3 be good at something it's not, and vice versa. Don't let Angular be good at something it's not. So check out that link there alongside if you want to see. I can show you. So, like I said, replacing most of D3 with pure SVG and Angular. So you can see here, this is basically what he's done, using just Angular, an ng repeat on these circles and setting. And see, you had to come up with a custom directive, which is no big deal, to set these attributes because, like I said, the way I think SVG parses is different in the browser than HTML. You actually throw an exception anytime you try to set these via Angular without this special directive that we've created here. So, just to show you that it can be done, there are the circles based on data. So it's possible. I've yet to find a good case for it, but maybe someday. So how do we go about combining Angular and D3? I say that D3 code should be completely independent, completely decoupled from Angular. We couple it when we via these reusable D3 components, and that's what I'm going to show in examples here that follow. The reason we do this is I try not to put D3 logic, with the exception of maybe instantiating the actual bare SVG DOM element in the directives, because I can't decouple those for testing for one. I don't really want to bring all that D3 code along with that Angular directive. I don't really need outside that framework. I'd like to develop my bar chart separately and be able to just attach it to a DOM element at will and pass it around. One thing that does, when we do this, use these reusable D3 components. This is actually what the book that co-authored was on, but it's based on this great article that I highly recommend reading by the creator as well, towards reusable charts. And essentially, the too long and didn't read on this thing is that it's creating an API for your chart. You wrap it up in these functions that we can then assign widths and heights and such, and update these charts over and over and reuse them over and over again. So this is a great article I'd check out if you want to integrate Angular with D3. So this forces our chart API and it improves testability because we coupled it from this rather large Angular framework. Scalable, that we can maybe pass this around. We can make smaller components. We can, have an reusable access component, which we can then attach to a bar chart, scatter plot, and so forth. So it allows us to kind of scale this library that we can build up. And I don't have a good word for migration ability. But basically, what if the boss says, okay, no more Angular, and you got to now take all those charts out of those directives that you created? That would be probably rather troublesome for you. So by decoupling these two, we can, I guess, protect ourselves from these changes, especially things like Angular 2.0 come along. You have a really zealous boss who might see you have the latest library. From the looks of things, it's going to be quite a bit different. So it'd be nice to be able to easily take some of these components you spent a lot of time in, these charts, these reusable charts, and just kind of pull them out and put them in whatever comes down the pipe. And like I said, so that means framework agnostic at that point. One thing we must keep in mind, it's really not that tough to integrate D3 and Angular, despite how intimidating it may seem, is that if we create these reusable APIs, which I'll show you, what we need to do is if we want the charts to talk to the app, then on those events in the chart, we need to manually trigger Angular's digest cycle. And I'm going to show you how to do that and what that looks like and what that means if we don't do it. And one thing to keep in mind, the biggest thing that I tell guys coming in, new guys, is that be careful with these scope watches and that scope apply on those events. You don't really want to fire Angular's digest cycle to update everything in the app on every drag, because drags are expensive. Digest cycles can be expensive in very large apps. You got to fire all those watches and such on all the data. Then it's going to get very expensive and it's going to really hurt the performance of your app. So an example here. So this is kind of like how the thought process, I suppose, kind of develops in my brain for the most part. This is a static map that I put together of Austin's voter turnout by precinct for the 2000 in November, right? November election. So you can see Austin on a whole didn't do very good in the voter turnout. But this is by precinct. And this is just a static visualization I've created. Just a simple map, 35 right here. It's pretty sparse, but Travis County color-coded via thresholds by the percentage voter turnout. And there's not much I can do with this. I can't, there's no clicking, there's nothing. It's just a static map that I can use. And for that, let's see. So this is a typical, this is very typical of D3 code that you'll see. We set some dimensions. We append, we select something on the DOM, an HTML element, and we append the SVG. And here I'm just putting a simple, that background you see, the gray background. This is, like I told you, the enter, exit selections in D3. Like I said, I would happy to talk about this, but it's a little, I can spend about 3 hours just talking about these few lines of code here. This is this is what puts the background on the screen. This is our geographic projection here. So we need some sort of geo projection, right, to reproject these latitude and longitudes that I got from this Austin shapefile to coordinates on the screen. So I use a projection that D3 has given me. And then a path function that D3 has. It says, given a geographic projection, I can make paths for you. I can make SVG paths. I can give you those really ugly D attributes that nobody ever wants to type by hand. I've got some scale in here for color. So basically I say anything from 0 to 20, give me this color. Anything from 20 to 40, that color. So on and so forth. You should be pretty easy to see that it's, that's how I'm encoding these colors here. And then I'm getting my data. So there's a companion library for D3 that I tend to use called Q, which is basically like promises. It's, load up, then do this. So I basically wait for all 3 of my JSON files to come in. Do some data cleaning, right? right here. Basically, all I'm doing is calculating a turnout, because I don't have the turnout server side, and I was too lazy to write a script to do it. So I just did it client side, and so it's basically taking, it's looking at total registered, or total turnout divided by registered voters for that precinct, and giving me a turnout. And then I have these functions here that actually create the precincts. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. I just want to show you guys the general flow of how this kind of evolves and where things end up in the app as it evolves, out of just a static visualization to something more interactive and more app-like. And feel free to stop me if you get questions. So I've got these functions: the render precincts, which puts the precincts on the screen; the 35, which puts that 35, that path on there that represents I-35, just for some context; and a county, which is actually just a clip path, an SVG clip path that keeps that I-35, which runs from who knows how long, I forget where it starts, all the way up through the Dallas there. Also, would just go off the screen if I didn't put a clip path in. So that's pretty much it. That's all the code I need to do, which seems like a good bit, but that's what I need to do that static visualization. Now, if I want to take this visualization here, just from something static to something maybe a little more dynamic, I'd like to see the actual numbers by precinct. Well, I can still do that in D3. So here I've got that same chart, and I've added a table that I put in D3, a very ugly table, but a table nonetheless, where I can actually click, and you can see how it's highlighted the precinct over here. So if I want to say, does anybody know what precinct they are? Nobody? Yeah, sorry, I just did it this afternoon. So it's this precinct right here. So you can see, it doesn't show up too good on this projector, but it's highlighting here in the chart as well when you click across. So there's this interactivity I have now linking these two visualizations. So this is pure D3 at this point.
So real quick, can you go back to the static one?
Yeah.
And is there like a quote unquote entry point you can tell us? Because this code's going to be available, right?
Yeah, I can certainly make it available. What do you mean?
Inside the code itself?
Oh, yeah.
What the entry point is?
Yeah. So actually, as part of the mean, my website is Angular, or it's Node and Express.
Okay.
No Mongo. I don't need a database. So I'll have to figure out a good way to post these, actually, now I think about it. But essentially all it is, I'm extending these here. So here I'm just linking to these scripts.
Okay.
So I can can this up and send it along.
Yeah.
Make it a little easier to follow along for if you want to look at these codes again. But yeah, so basically each one of these is just a JADE view that's linking to whatever rev I have in the code. So for the interactivity, it's the same code up to here. I actually have now a table function. It's going to render this table. And this is the reason I picked this as an example is you can see all the logic that's required to render a table via in D3. One, I got to select the HTML. I got to add the table head, the THs, all these appends, just to set up that table. And I think it's a good use case to show how much code the Angular can save in the HTML. So I'll show you that next. But for the interactivity, essentially all I have to do is come up here to the precincts, or rather, if I click on a table row, what it does is it says select this element, the table row, and give it a class active, which in my CSS, again, web standard, I give it a class of active, and in my CSS I can give that table row something, or the class active, and give it some sort of styling, however I want. And then the precinct elements, I just basically filter on those, matching the ID of the table row to the ID of the precinct, and I give it a class of active as well. So that's all, and it's vice versa, same thing here. If I click on a precinct and I give this precinct the class of active. And for the rows in the table, I filter them, and if the ID of the precinct equals the ID of the row, the ID is the precinct ID that I've assigned. I give it the class active, and then I can style as one. Let me see. So in the styles here, now that you said the but for the guess the contrast. Any particular color of interest? Green? Let's see here. I don't know if that helps at all. So now it's green. I'm not sure it makes it better, but anyway, you get the point. So this is how I can do the interactive. Yeah, it's increasing the stroke width. Yeah. The active just changes the stroke width a little bit. Yeah, no, it's just very faint there when it's unactive. So I just. So anyway, so we can see how we can get a table on there and interactive with D3. So this is where, at that point with tables, I don't really like making tables with D3. It's possible, it's certainly not too terrible, but you know, it's pretty obvious that Angular is great with making tables via ng repeats. So what we can do is, as you can see, this looks pretty much the same, but I've just put the table in here with Angular. We've lost that interactivity now because I've taken the D3 portion out from the table. And so we've lost some of that interactivity. I can't click, you know, here to get the precincts to highlight and vice versa. So this is kind of the major overhaul of the code at this point. So what we've done here is I've instantiated an Angular app. I'm assuming, sorry if I'm wrong, I'm assuming somewhat level of understanding of Angular, right, for most people, somewhat basic level at least, instantiating apps and such. So I instantiate the Angular app. I give it the controller, injecting scope and HTTP. And I'm getting some of my data here. This is a really bad, we'll refine this on the next two final examples. So we're loading up the precinct data using Angular's HTTP GET. This is like recalc those turnout numbers, and I attach them to the scope. I'm doing this because the precinct now, the tables, I want the table to be handled by Angular, so I need to get it on the scope. So I'm using HTTP GET because that's going to apply the scope digest cycle for me automatically. If I was to use D3 JSON, I would have to apply scope.apply because D3 is loading the JSON file outside of Angular, therefore Angular has no concept of it. Therefore, once it got in to my controller, my table would not appear. So by letting Angular go get the precinct data, the data that I want in the table, we can let the scope digest happen automatically in Angular. And now I render my precincts. And you can see here, this is a terrible way to do it. I put all this D3 code that was in there originally in the controller now. I would never do this. I never recommend doing this. I've seen it done, but I wouldn't recommend it. This is kind of a, you know, hodgepodge approach. Now I'm letting D3 get the Austin voting data. So basically, I just kind of spliced in the table part from the D3 and let Angular do it. So this is all the same. Calculated turnout function, rendering our precincts, rendering I-35, rendering the clip paths. So this is all happening inside one Angular controller. We've got an Angular app called app, and we've got one controller. We have no directives yet. We have no services. You can see here in the, so this is, I'm using J just because I think it's a lot easier to read. This is my Angular app and the Angular controller and ng controller. And these are, you know, the containers that I need. Here's the figure that I grab over here to add the SVG. So just to show you that it is there on the DOM. But here I've made the difference of, instead of doing all that table generation in JavaScript via D3, I can now take advantage of this ng repeat. This is all I need to make that table that looks identical. With what I would say advantage is that I've used an Angular filter here that rounds the numbers. So I had those really long numbers before, you know, percentage-wise, and now I've used Angular to actually round them out. So I can take advantage of that filter as well in Angular. So I much prefer this method for making a table. If all I need to do is make a table, I don't think I would really inject Angular. It's a lot of weight just to make a table. But just to show you what the difference is, we can take all that JavaScript code out and just put this in to make our table there. But like I said, we lost that interactivity. So what we can do now, I'll show you here, is move this into a directive. And not necessarily, that's not required for the interactivity, but I want to show you now how we take all that code out of the controller and how we create this API to that precinct chart, that map, that we can then link to the table on the left. So this is where the directive comes in. And in conjunction with the directive, so I see here, just to show you the demo, you won't see too much from before, but it's the same thing. Now this is Angular and D3 talking for the most part. Rather, this is Angular talking to D3. D3 is not talking back. If I click on the map and nothing on the left changes. Because my map isn't talking to Angular at this point, just Angular is talking to D3. So to see what that looks like, nothing really has changed on the markup other than I've got an ng click on the table row. So I say I want to select the that table row by ID. And other than that, it's really no different. We're just doing an ng repeat on the table precincts. So what's that look like here in code? So you can see much cleaner than before. I'm letting Angular go ahead and get all the data right here. All these gets are getting that JSON data. Calculate the turnout again immediately when I get the precinct data, and then I attach them to scope here. So I've got this scope data, which is an object, because I want the keys. I want to see the precinct key, so I assign that to the precinct data, so on and so forth. So you can see they come in from these JSON calls. And then I just do a quick map over the precinct data just to clean it up, because GeoJSON data is not very pretty. And I'm just running over that to turn an array of objects, of precincts with an ID and a turnout number, which is then what I put in here in my table. So these table precincts, these table precincts are here on scope. So just do some cleanup for my own sanity's sake. So this is letting Angular take care of loading all the data. I've gotten all that DOM manipulation out of my Angular controller, which is always a good thing. And I've got this select function that basically iterates over all the precincts. And if the ID equals the one that has been clicked on, back in this guy. So right here, the select function in our controller. If that ID equals the ID or the one we clicked on, we give it selected as true, otherwise false, and we set it to a selected variable on scope. And I'll show you why we do that. That's because we've taken all that DOM manipulation in the controller and put it into this reusable D3 component. So this is a reusable component that's basically an API to this map. So we can, like I said, I wish I had time to explain exactly how this reusable component works. I just want to show you what it looks like and where it goes in the scheme of things. So we've got this map reusable component that's basically wrapped all that D3 code. And this reusable function actually returns a function. You'll see that a lot in D3. It's actually how D3 is built. Most times you'll see functions return functions. That's why a lot of people say it has a steep learning curve. It's very confusing to those who aren't really familiar with that style. But basically what this does is it allows us to pass in a DOM element, any DOM element, basically the root SVG right here, and we can pass whatever we want to in here. And this will allow us to basically reuse this component wherever we want. We just pass in a new SVG to this function, and all our enter, update, exits will happen just as they did before, but now they react on a different DOM element that we provide. What this does, it has some getter setter methods. So I'm allowed to set the data here. So I can set the precinct data and pass in new data and update the chart. I can set the width. So what this does is it sets the width internally here via closure right here. The width of the the width of the visualization, which we need for things such as the background, right? This is the background width. And we've got a getter setter for the height, which will set the height as well. Reprojects, because geoprojections need to know the height and the width of what they're, what area they operate in. So basically, it's just got some very simple getter setters that set some values that we can set and then call the update, call the update, call the update. And also, we've got a select here that will actually, once we pass in an ID, it takes all the precincts and sets their active to false, and then looks for whichever ID matches the precincts of the one we want to select, and sets it to active. So it doesn't look much different. It's just set in a getter setter. The reason is we have this directive here. So this is basically my map directive, as you can see. I call it map. And it accepts data and a selected, which is an ID. So what I've done is instantiate this reusable map right here. So you can see that is simply this function. So calling this map function returns this function, as you can see at the bottom. So what I've got here at the end, when I call map, is I've got another function assigned to the map, which is the instance, essentially, of that visualization of that map. In my directive, I set the SVG basic dimensions. I set the width of the map and the height of the map. And then via this scope watch, I'm able to actually watch that precinct data change. So when I see, and I do this because on the initial scope apply, a lot of times there's no data available. So with no data, that's not really good for D3. So I look, if there's no precinct data, I basically just return from this. That's essentially to catch that first digest cycle where the data isn't there yet. So once I see that I've got data, I pass it into the map, and I call the map again with the SVG element. So this is an actual DOM element. So what I do, this here can be rewritten as essentially, this is the confusing part for a lot of people, because data is a getter setter on the map, and what data returns when you supply it with an argument is the function itself again. So this is where people's map, their heads, the brain gets tightened up. So you can see when I provide data with an argument, it sets the data via the closure, but then it returns the function, which is like the generator function for the visualization. So by returning this, when I call this exports function, which is this up here, right, with the SVG, it's going to run through D3's enter, update, exit every time I do that. It's going to update this visualization as needed. So essentially what I do is I watch for data, and then I put the new data to the map and call the SVG. And then I also register a watch on that selected. So once I see that the selected ID has changed via the watch, I call the getter setter from on the map reusable with the new ID. And that will call this selected function here at the bottom, which will apply the appropriate active classes. So I know that's a lot, but the big takeaway to this is just kind of where to put the code. You put your visualization separate in a reusable component. You include that reusable component in this directive, and then you can pass data into this directive via regular Angular methods to continually update the map as needed. So via Angular's watches, you can just watch for new data, pass the new data into the map, and call the SVG. So if this is coming from an API, maybe from Express or something via sockets that's coming in, we could potentially watch something on our controller scope, and every time that changes, we can update the map accordingly. So, and this is why I said that you can get in trouble if you're updating things very, very frequently. This is a lot, especially if there's a lot of DOM elements. You're calling this update over and over and over and over again. You can be doing a lot of heavy DOM manipulation. So this is something you just need to be careful with, watching, something that's changing very, very rapidly. So this is kind of the basic layout that I typically follow. I've got my reusable component here, vanilla JavaScript, I would say, outside of Angular completely, which I can include in the direct markup here. I can put my map. So this is the actual map here. This is the actual map itself. So this is where we set the data. So the data is on the scope of our controller. We set the selected. And then we've got a method here that we can select outside of the map. So that's the basic layout of where the code goes. The one last thing I want to cover real quick is how do we get Angular or D3 to talk to Angular. So this is the final revision. You can see here, well, not quite the final, the other one's just polished, but as you can see here, we can click around here, but Angular is, D3 is also talking to Angular. And I just want to make you aware, the way we do that via these reusable components is D3 has something in there called dispatch. What dispatch essentially does is allow you to attach custom events to our reusable map component. So there's plenty of documentation on there, but I just want to show you, at least get it out in front of you. That's how we talk to components, or get D3 to talk to components in Angular. So essentially, all we do is that when we register a click event on a precinct, we call a dispatch on our map component, and we've bound it down here to our actual reusable component. All that really means for us is that I can now have this on method available to my map. So if you need your visualization to talk to Angular, you're going to want to check out D3 dispatch. And this is where I talked about, since this is an event, the select event happens outside of Angular, this is where I actually have to apply scope. So without this here, our visualization, clicking on a precinct would not update the table. So anytime you want an event in D3 to talk to Angular, you'll need that D3, that scope apply. So that, essentially what this does, this is an Angular function to select, you can see up here. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this notation, but essentially what this says is evaluate an expression in the parent scope. So it's calling the scope select in the parent being the controller. So it's calling this scope select and passing in the ID of the precinct that we clicked on so they can update the table accordingly. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just you got to know the right things to use, using dispatch and using scope apply when you need these two guys to talk. So, and then the final one, nothing really too crazy there. I will say in the final revision, I would probably move all this data stuff into a service. I don't have a service here. I just tend to load data in services because then it can be, we can pass it around since services and Angulars are singletons. If we inject it over and over the place, I don't have to reload this data every time. If I don't, I can just attach it to a variable inside of a service, inject that service anywhere I need it, and then have the data readily available. So just wanted to let you know that I would probably move all this data logic into a service, and then just have a service with a load method that would return all this data when got it all from my server. So, because then I can move this, and this doesn't really belong to me in a controller. It is at the moment, but I would put probably these lines here into a service that I could re-inject if I was doing this on a enterprise or larger scale. So the reason I just want to show you kind of what this would look like is then with Angular we can get a little cooler stuff, like we can do the native searches, the native Angular filters. So you see here we've we filtered this list if we want to search for a specific precinct and highlight it. You can clear the filter, click, and so forth. So this is all done in Angular. None of this here is done in D3, and it's all done mostly here in the markup. So you can see on this table, I've got this ng, or basically I've used an Angular filter to filter on the selected ID that was clicked on. And even some of the crazy like ordering, I can do all this. None of this is actually on the scope of the controller. This is probably where people are like, why the hell would you put that in, some of the stuff in the markup. But for some of the things like this, it's kind of cool because it's quick. It's very, it's very, I guess, perhaps precise. Perhaps some would say not. But just with these lines of code here, I can get, all the sorting is all done in HTML via Angular. None of it is done in D3 or anything. So that's kind of what a final, I guess, app. It's definitely a contrived example, but your reusable D3 component, if I said reusable enough, I hope so. goes into an Angular directive, which then using standard Angular controllers, we can assign data to that directive and eventually that map via scope watches. So that's kind of what the final app would look like. So basically, the biggest things I can drive home is to use the D3's reusable paradigm, read up on D3 reusability so that you can kind of dovetail the D3 reusable components into an Angular directive. Use scope watch wisely as watching really large objects and watching them frequently or watching data that's constantly changing. Under this scenario, every time that data changes and that watch fires, your map updates. If you've got 100 or 1,000 DOM elements, that's not always the cheapest thing to do to reselect and update all that information. So just be careful with watches. And then using D3 dispatch and D3 rebind when you need to get events out of the map to talk to Angular. And don't forget when you use those D3 dispatches or those D3 events to fire, or else Angular will not know that that event happened. So then if you're looking for some D3 specific help, link here there's a bunch of tutorials out there. The Google group is very active, so feel free to jump in and ask questions. Ask whatever you think might even be the silliest question. We've all asked those questions. But the group is very active, very helpful. You'll see a lot of the same names answering questions. Obviously, there's Stack Overflow D3 tag. There's like one guy who answers every question. It's ridiculous. I think he's like full-time looking for like karma or something. I don't know. He must never work. It's ridiculous, actually. And there's just a ton of examples. There's the GitHub, or let's see, on GitHub, and then that put together this searchable one. So it's maintained via Google Doc, so you can actually add your own work here if you wanted to. But it's relatively searchable, and it's got a bunch of, organized by type, so it's all manual. Looking for examples. And then the gallery on the D3 page is it's quite advanced, so feel free to check that out when you need, lots of good examples. And other than that, are there any questions? Sorry if I hurt your heads.
Hurt my head, that's for sure.
There's a lot to it, but there's really only like I said, the key things to keep in mind. Stick to the reusable components in D3 as much as possible. Try to keep as much D3 logic out of directives as you can, because then you're going to have to uncouple that if you ever need to change it. And then don't forget to fire those scope digest cycles on D3 events. That's a lot of code organization. But those are the key things working with Angular. It's really not anything really specific with D3 and Angular other than that scope applied. Everything else is just pretty much, it's just a piece of reusable JavaScript inside a directive. So. Any questions?
Is the D3 code that you wrote, is that testable, like the access is testable?
Yeah, so what I typically do is, you mean just testing D3 specific reusables, or? Yeah, so I'll use something like sometimes JS DOM, which can run a node, right, which is basically a headless DOM. And I can use that to basically apply, append those DOM elements in that DOM and go do some checking. So I like to decouple it from Angular as much as possible. There's a lot of overhead to sometimes get Angular testing working, especially with directives and all the dependency injection that comes along with it. I'd rather just know that my bar chart works. There might be somebody who comes in and wants to just work on visualizations. So that's what they're really good at. And I'd rather than be able to test, yes, this will render a bar chart if you give me the right data. So it's really about trying to test the API to that chart. So.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
One.
So if you're doing like local application between Angular and D3,
I mean, I've done a little bit with you're talking like PhoneGap or something maybe, or you mean like a mobile website or just like an actual mobile app? This doesn't really matter. It depends really. It depends on what kind of, I guess, how much data you're slinging around. For something fairly light, I haven't seen issues at all. I've used Angular in D3 inside a PhoneGap app before, and it seemed to work fairly well. 1,000 points, but I don't know that I'm doing good on a phone either, looking at 10,000 points. But it's certainly possible. I've had some pretty good success with it. I've never really hit the limit, but I don't think I've pushed it that hard either. So. Yeah.
Kind of used to whenever we put a lot of points. Let's see what's just roll numbers.
Yeah, that's the question I always get. It really depends. It depends on what you're doing with those points. If they're just static, you know, you can get away with more. If you're trying to move them around, it can be more problematic for sure. I don't know what number you're working with, I guess.
I got some about down. It's a kind of line job, but with some zooming functionality.
I mean, I put 1,000 on it. I've gotten some, you know, it can be sometimes hesitant. There's different zooming methods you can use. There's geometric and semantic zooming that will help. The latter being one. I get them confused, but one of them will apply translate, which is faster than actually setting the attributes. So that one can get you around if you're kind of running up to that limit. But that's not too high of a limit, 1,000 points. For anything above that, I usually tell people aggregate your data because the user probably may not want to look at 100,000 points or go to Canvas. Yeah, speaking of, I guess, Canvas, I don't know how well this will work, but someone asked me at one meetup about D3 and Canvas if it was possible. And this is kind of herky-jerky on this connection, but these are tweets coming in live via sockets. So I'm running this on my little tiny micro instance, which doesn't help you. But this is a globe essentially. These are all live tweets. This is a globe that's being basically, you can see the world come to shape via Twitter or via tweets. So these are all geo-encoded I'm looking at live right now. As you can see, it gets a little goofy. I just did it as a proof of concept, but this is Canvas. This isn't SVG. And D3 is doing the projection, the layout of the projection, and it's also doing I guess the animation you would say as the points kind of come on and slowly fade. A little bit crude as far as the animation, but like I said, it was mainly to prove the concept. So if you get above that and you're not looking at a lot of user interactivity, because Canvas isn't best for that, you just want to show information, then Canvas can certainly be a candidate. Everyone but North Korea. Kind of dark over there.
Yeah.
I mean, these are live, and it's Twitter's like search. It's not their fire hose, so this is certainly a subset. I think it would probably crash my micro instance if I was getting every tweet. But it's definitely live. I think I've sent one. I zoomed into Austin and sent one from my patio and saw it pop up within like, I don't know, half a second. It was kind of creepy. But yeah, eventually it'll start filling. I think I pop it off after 30,000 just because it was a demo. So I think it gets up to 30,000 points and starts clicking them off, because at that point you really can't tell a difference.
Any other questions? No? So I guess what I usually try to do is I try to give the presenter something. I was going to give you a t-shirt, but I ran out of t-shirts. But I have a koozie. The Austin Mead Stack did. Want to hold it real quick so I can hold it up real quick so I can get a picture of you there. Just a minute here. Just in case. There we go. All right. If there aren't any other questions, it's good to answer a round of applause.
Andy, what I usually do is I have the presenter solve.
I can do that. You didn't hit me yet, or hit me.
Everybody got one in here?
Definitely have some Google Hangouts.
And I think you just call it the last thing.
Last three, 099.
All right. There you go. Well, let me take a quick snapshot here. Next one. Make sure they're not on top, because that's what the mirror.
101.
Boom.
By the way, that's right there.
By the way, 102, 99.
Everything up. I have students from GitHub and from Slack, so you guys are welcome to grab some. Right up here, and we have some business cards from Kumar and Iron Yards. So help yourselves, and I think that's it. I think Andy's gonna be here for a few more minutes. Yeah. Post the next meetup here goes soon. And thanks, everybody.
For those groups, what do we get some plan with those?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Project
yeah.
groups?